Today I'd like to welcome to the studio Joe Spinelli, Senior Managing Director at Kroll Investigations and Dispute Practices based in New York. In a career spanning more than 30 years across both the private and public sectors, Joe has been a preeminent leader in multiple fields, including white-collar investigations, anti-bribery and corruption, FCPA risk management, monitorships, criminal investigations, and forensic accounting. Prior to joining Kroll, Joe was a managing director at Navigant in the firm's global investigations and compliance practice, serving as the global practice leader for its FCPA and anti-bribery and corruption practice, and co-leader of its monitoring practice. Formerly, Joe held numerous leadership roles at KPMG, where his contributions included founding the firm's forensic accounting practice and serving as both office coordinating partner for the Northeast Public Services and as healthcare compliance national forensic partner in charge. Joe's earlier career in public service included 8 years in the groundbreaking role of Inspector General for New York State. Joe started his career as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Based both in New York and New Haven field offices, he was involved in several high-profile cases. Joe, I understand that you served as case agent for the investigation and prosecution of a U.S. congressman in the FBI's app scam.
That's correct.
All right, so we'll have to get you back sometime and we can exchange sting perspectives.
Okay.
All right.
That'd be great.
Well, Joe, welcome today.
Thank you very much.
Joe, today I want to talk a little bit about the Kroll-Ethisphere, quote, the Year of Global Expansion and Enforcement 2016 Anti-Bribery and Corruption Benchmarking Report, unquote. I also want to thank you for making Kevin Brain available last year for a written interview in my blog on your 2015 report. So let's focus on the executive summary where it states that compliance advancements can, quote, especially be seen at the C-suite and board level, where engagement is trending up, unquote. Joe, there's a robust debate about how compliance needs to have a seat at the strategy table, especially where forecasts, investments, and resource decisions are made. Does that compliance advancement address that particular strategic issue? In other words, are you seeing more compliance visibility at the business table?
Without a doubt. And I'll tell you why. What I am seeing is the CFO, who's part of the actual suite, okay, C-suite, will be directly involved and should be directly involved on a daily basis for any merger and acquisitions that are being, transpired at that particular organization. And what I'm seeing is that the due diligence that has to be conducted on the various principles is a function of the CFO and the compliance officer and the general counsel. So it's a team effort. It's part of, I think, an integrated effort in the C-suite. And I will tell you that I have seen more involvement of the compliance individuals and the compliance committee on transactions that are strategically related. I think mergers and acquisitions is a perfect example. And so many companies now are, I think, very sensitive to doing an incisive investigation and compliance being involved with due diligence. And if they don't do it, then obviously they're inheriting problems that they don't need from an individual standpoint, from a lack of compliance standpoint, and obviously that could be very, very costly. So it's an insurance policy.
Are you seeing a little bit more engagement at the business level to where companies are making decisions about investing in certain, what you would probably consider to be high-risk areas? Do you see compliance being a part of that conversation?
I do, especially in the high-risk areas that you alluded to when they're BRIC countries.
Right.
If it's China, if it's Brazil, if it's India, Korea, any of those countries, Mexico, I'm seeing more and more involvement with compliance being at the forefront and helping to strategize the best way to do it.
That's a real positive development.
I think it is, and I think it's a development in the right direction by far. And it's long overdue, by the way.
Yep, exactly. Well, interesting. On the other hand, the summary states that, quote, almost half of the respondents report that they do not have enough resources to support their organization's anti-corruption efforts. adding that respondents are expected to be doing much more with less, unquote. Now, Joe, that seems to be a little bit counter to the finding of greater engagement from the C-suite, which you would think would lead to more generous compliance budgets and resources. So how do you reconcile both of those trends?
Well, more or less sounds like government, doesn't it? But in this instance, I think what really needs to be said is that I don't want to be a CEO or a member of the C-suite that has to answer the Justice Department and say, we didn't allocate really sufficient funds and resources to get the compliance function where it should be. I happen to believe, and the clients that I deal with on a daily basis are very sensitive to that. They're making a great commitment to making sure that that compliance officer isn't someone who's wearing 2-3 hats, that they have a specific dedicated function just to compliance. They're a senior member in senior management, which I think also goes to the heart of them being involved in strategy and strategic endeavors. And I think also that what you're going to find is that compliance it cannot really be effective without the right resources. And if they're not effective, you don't have an effective compliance program. And there's no true dedication to it. And the DOJ is scrutinizing that very, very meticulously right now. They're not playing games. They're going after companies. And one of the first questions they're going to ask is, show me the budget that you have allocated for your compliance function. And they'll make a determination whether or not they think that's sufficient. So I believe that, as contradictory as that may sound in the actual survey, I think you're going to see more and more C-suite individuals who are responsible for compliance and the allocation of budgetary resources for compliance stepping up to the plate and giving them more and more.
Yeah, I mean, breaking it down on the individual level, who wants to be the person to say, yeah, I'm the one who trimmed the budget on compliance?
Well, you're putting a target on your head. You're the first one they're going to be looking at, and because they want to ask you why. Why was that? So I think you're going to find that the commitment will be greater and greater each and every year, especially with the C-level people saying, I opened a newspaper today on the front page. Company X got banged for not having a true compliance program. We got to make sure we're proactive. We got to make sure we have the right resources, and we make the right commitment for a zero tolerance culture.
Well, interesting to see how that trend goes for this year.
Yeah, for sure.
So in the section called The Magnitude of Risk, 2016 Predictions, you state, and this is your personal quote, that everyone waited a long time for the 2012 DOJ SEC Resource Guide to the FCPA, and now they have it, and they're on notice as to what needs to be done, unquote, where you conclude that as a result, companies are now more proactive. So now we have the 2016 FCPA Enforcement Plan and Guidance. Joe, do you see that as a continuum of the 2012 Resource Guide as giving multinationals even a more detailed roadmap, even if it's still being called a pilot program?
I think it was an attempt to do exactly what you described. I think they came up short. I think that the pilot program, as they like to put it, and the enhancement on the compliance should have probably included several other things. I think what we really need to do, and what the Department of Justice really needs to do, is to have a definitive compliance defense. The same way the UK Bribery Act has it. What does that entail? Well, obviously it entails all the major components of what you should have in your compliance program. But more importantly, where I think they came up short is they should have had included in that, if in fact you voluntarily disclose, if no one at the higher level of your organization was involved in misconduct, if in fact you've done an investigation and identified individuals who partook and did partake in misconduct, if in fact you have an effective compliance program, if you took remedial action on any potential shortcomings in your compliance program, if you've done all of that, then you will not be prosecuted. You have a valid defense, and that's what I think should have been stated in this pilot program. And I think it would have sent the right message, and it would have been, unequivocally, they would have had a definitive answer as to what are the expectations and what do I have to do. Because most of corporate America, and I say this with total certainty, is honest, decent, and want to do the right thing. Without question. All they want to know is, what are you expecting from me?
Right.
And I think all of the aforementioned, if it was put down in paper and shown to the
Sure.
world, would have conveyed the right message, a clear, concise message, where corporate America could have said then, okay, let's do A, B, C, D, and E and make
Right.
sure we do it right.
I would imagine that would trim down the time from the current average of, 6 or 7 years for one of these investigations, because with a more direct roadmap, companies will know how to better be prepared.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's cost effective for the corporation too, so they're happy. They're not having to do corporate investigations for, like you said, 6 or 7 years. They trim it down, they do it quickly, but they do it in a comprehensive way, and they know exactly what components they have to meet and what's the guidance that they really have to adhere to get what they need to do.
Interesting. So it sounds like there may have been, as long as it was a pilot anyway, there may have been a little bit of a missed opportunity.
I think it was. I think there was a missed opportunity there, but let's see, maybe they'll amend it.
Sure. So let's talk about due diligence for a moment. Kroll Managing Director Steve Bach is quoted as saying that there is no silver bullet or black box when it comes to monitoring. He adds that companies need to analyze their resources and address their risks, saying, quote, "There is no one-size-fits-all approach," unquote. One of the previous Kroll reports talked about the danger of vetting and forgetting. That's a line I use all the time. It's a great one. So what are some of the monitoring issues that companies need to focus upon? And Joe, we hear this quite often in that multinationals are much more focused on initial due diligence than what happens when a third party's through the front door.
It's true.
So what say you?
Well, here's my take on that. It all begins with DOJ's opinion release 08-02, which mandated that global corporations risk rank their third parties into high, medium, and low risk categories. If it's high risk, and in some cases even medium risk, then enhanced due diligence should be conducted, which also would include boots on the ground if necessary.
Sure.
But here's where the problem really lies. People will do that, and they'll do it very, very well. And then they will forget that 6 months from then or a year from then, they should have had an interval monitoring component to their due diligence.
Right.
People's status change from time to time. We have had instances, I will tell you, Richard, where we did third-party due diligence for large corporations, went back 6 months later, and the same individual that we did due diligence for initially is now a foreign official.
Yeah.
Changes the whole complexion and the whole ground set. So my point is that interval monitoring is an absolute necessity. It should be built into whatever portal you're using to risk rank your third parties, and it should be a major component, and it has to be done continuously. Okay, otherwise it's useless.
And based on the example which you just gave, and something I've seen myself, regime change should be one of those automatic triggers.
It's an automatic, absolutely right. And even marital status, believe it or not, where someone marries into a foreign government. That also has been situations that we've uncovered in doing interval monitoring type due diligence. So that interval monitoring is absolutely essential, and it has to be done continuously, not just once.
Do you think random sampling is another advisable process?
Absolutely. That's part of it. But without the interval monitoring component, and it has to be done, I think, for the entire population, not just for this one or that one. If you extrapolate, a percentage, you may miss the one that could really hurt you the most. So I think it has to be comprehensive and it has to be done incisively.
Yeah, and as someone who was charged with FCPA offenses in Holland and New York City for the United Nations, I don't think there's such a thing as no risk.
No, that's absolutely correct. Your risk is greater,
right?
And requires, as I said previously, even enhanced due diligence, so that if you want to go to bed at night and sleep well, you'll feel a lot more comfortable knowing that you've taken it to the limit.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, thank you, and we'll look forward to part 2 of our interview.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.